Shooting is only the start of a broader plot against Donald Trump. The plot to destroy Donald Trump is in full swing. The Pennsylvania rally shooting, the killing of an attendee, and the assassination attempt were just the prelude to an upcoming attack. As reported in our previous materials, the attempt on Donald Trump's life is inextricably linked to the activities of anti-cultists. These organizations not only initiated a hate campaign, branding Trump as the leader of a cult, and inciting aggression against him and his supporters, but they also manipulated the shooter using a method known as puzzle coding. This method is examined in detail in the documentary The Impact, which shows how similar tactics have been employed to orchestrate school shootings, deliberately creating chaos and violence in society. Immediately after the assassination attempt, an image circulated widely that depicted the supposed bullet trajectory that allegedly missed Donald Trump's head only because of a sudden turn. However, this model is not based on expert analysis of the bullet's trajectory, but is merely speculation that doesn't align with the timing of the shot. A thorough analysis of the shooting incident at Donald Trump's rally in Pennsylvania on July 13, 2024, makes it clear that the shooter's intent was not to assassinate the former president, but to kill his supporters. The attacker focused on the people standing behind Trump, continuing to fire even after Trump ducked out of sight. The evidence suggests that the shooter acted according to a premeditated plan aimed at killing rally participants. In this plan, the bullet striking Donald Trump's ear was an unintended accident. The shooting at the rally was part of a broader strategy by anti-cultists aimed at discrediting and undermining Donald Trump's political career. It is important to note that the goal was not to kill Trump, as his death could have provided the Republican Party with a significant advantage in the upcoming elections. A new, unchallenged Republican candidate would have had a strong chance of winning, since the opposing side would not have had enough time to develop a counter-strategy. Therefore, the organizers of this provocation were interested in ensuring that Trump remained alive, but lost trust and was discredited and humiliated in the eyes of voters. If the shooter's objective had indeed been to kill Donald Trump, achieving that from a distance of 150 yards would have been relatively easy, even for an inexperienced marksman. At 200 yards, anyone trained on a rifle can shoot a golf ball repeatedly, and a trained sniper knows this is an easy headshot. A tap and golf putt, even with iron sights, former Navy SEAL sniper Brandon Webb said in his after-action report about the shooting. The bullets continued to fly past Trump and hit his supporters seated behind him. With a properly adjusted and calibrated weapon equipped with suitable optics, even a person without shooting experience would be unlikely to miss at a distance of 150 yards. This task is straightforward, unlike shooting at 300 yards, which requires certain skills. Evidently, the shooter's objective was to fire on a trajectory close to Trump, but to hit his supporters instead. The shot that grazed Trump's ear was a miss that underscores the shooter's inexperience. It highlights that the bullet was meant to pass very close to Trump, but his sudden movements resulted in the near miss. Understanding that the bullet's trajectory would be scrutinized later, the shooter aimed as close to Trump as possible to create an opportunity for Trump to inflate the information that the attempt was against him, and subsequently linked this fact to a disinformation campaign suggesting that Trump himself staged the assassination attempt. In other words, he was set up from the start. Simultaneously with the shooting, a massive disinformation campaign was launched in the media. This campaign aimed to spread claims that the incident was a staged event organized to boost Donald Trump's electoral chances. Within hours of the shooting in Pennsylvania, the term staged became the fourth most searched keyword on Google, followed by Trump and Secret Service. Hashtags #fake assassination and #stage shooting became the most popular on social media, alongside photos of a smiling Trump and grinning members of his security team. The Israeli technology company Cyabra determined that a smiling Donald Trump image was created using artificial intelligence just moments after the attack and quickly spread across social media. The company also found that social bots actively promoted false claims on platforms such as X, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Cyabra reported that 45% of accounts using hashtags #fake assassination and #stage shooting were inauthentic. As a result of the large-scale, well-planned, and organized disinformation campaign, public opinion underwent significant changes. More than a third of surveyed Democratic voters believe that the attack, as well as the deaths and injuries of Trump supporters, was staged by Trump and his team. The narrative also gained traction on social media, claiming that the blood on former President Donald Trump's ear was from a theatrical gel pack, similar to those used in wrestling, and that the shooting was a false flag operation since the shooter was a registered Republican, thus a one of Trump's own. Surprisingly, the FBI leadership began to play along with these conspiracy theories. On July 24, 2024, during a House Judiciary Committee meeting, FBI Director Christopher Wray, in response to questions, stated that he was uncertain of the cause of the injury to the ear of Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. The statement baffled Donald Trump and Republican Party representatives. On July 30th, Deputy FBI Director Paul Abate testified before the Senate Homeland Security Committee, confirming that Trump was indeed injured by a bullet. There is absolutely no doubt in the FBI's mind whether former President Trump was hit with a bullet and wounded in the ear. No doubt there never has been, Abate said when Sen. John Kennedy, RLA, asked if Trump was hit with a bullet. Senator Kennedy asked if Abate was certain of this, to which Abate affirmed. Kennedy also asked Abate to confirm that it was not a space laser, murder hornet, or Sasquatch, but a bullet that struck Trump. During the hearings, Abate informed the senators that the FBI had discovered 2 different social media accounts that they believed may belong to crooks. According to Abate, one account featured anti-Semitic themes and thoughts, while the second account on the Gab platform contained divergent viewpoints. Such statements also play into the narrative of those claiming the attack was carried out by a Trump sympathizer. However, Gab CEO Andrew Torba stated in a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, the FBI is now claiming that the Trump shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks, had an unspecified social media account in 2019-2020, when he was 15 years old, that posted anti-immigrant and anti-Semitic content. This is not consistent with Gab's understanding of the shooter's motives based on an emergency disclosure request, EDR, we received from the FBI last week for the Gab account Epic Microwave, which, based on the content of that EDR, the FBI appeared to think belonged to Thomas Crooks. The story is this: the account for which data was requested was, unequivocally, pro-Biden, and in particular, pro-Biden's immigration policy. To the best of Gab's knowledge, as of 2021, Crooks was a pro-lockdown, pro-immigration, left-wing Joe Biden supporter, added Torba in his post. Thus, the FBI's statements continue to raise increasing confusion and questions about their motives. Meanwhile, viral videos are spreading on social media showing Trump allegedly writing a check to the supposed shooter for staging the attack. Analysis of the bloggers spreading these messages reveals that they are the same individuals actively promoting global anti-cultist ideas. These bloggers reacted sharply negatively to the release of the film The Impact and Egon Chalakian's statements in the video Crossroads, which exposed the true organizers behind the campaign of hatred and ultimately civil war in the U.S. As shown in the materials of Impact and Chalakian, part of this strategy is to discredit Trump, who is outside their control, as a cult leader. The campaign to portray Trump as a cult leader is just the first stage in a series of more dangerous and destructive actions. The campaign against Donald Trump was launched in several stages. From 2016 to 2019, its narratives gradually and selectively penetrated the media space, and they have gained significant momentum since 2019. The sharp increase in publications about the Trump cult was triggered by the release of anti-cultist and deprogrammer Steven Hassan's book, The Cult of Trump. It is no coincidence that Hassan's book quickly received support and was actively promoted by major media outlets such as the New York Times and the Washington Post. Steven Hassan suddenly became a frequent guest on television, where he advanced dehumanizing and demonizing narratives about Trump and his supporters. In his interviews, Steven Hassan claimed that Donald Trump created a destructive cult around himself, acting as a narcissistic leader. Hassan also asserted that Trump supporters are in a state of hypnotic subjugation. Moreover, he advocated for forced deprogramming of citizens, implying the coercive alteration of their worldview. Anti-cult organizations actively used the guilt by association method, described in The Impact, as a key tactic for discrediting the victim. Donald Trump is deliberately equated with negative historical figures and leaders of destructive cults. This strategy aims to intentionally shape a negative image of Trump in the public consciousness by linking him with well-known examples of cult leaders involved in abuses and tragic consequences. For example, Trump is frequently compared to the notorious Jim Jones, founder of the People's Temple, often cited as an example of a cult leader who led hundreds of his followers to suicide. This rhetorical device aims to create strong associations in the audience's mind between Trump and leaders of so-called destructive cults, thereby reinforcing the narrative of his own involvement in the ideology of a destructive cult. Such claims represent a direct threat to democratic principles and citizens' rights, indicating the anti-Trump forces' willingness to resort to methods reminiscent of medieval inquisitions, aggressive re-education of dissenters, which is unacceptable in a rule of law society. Similar massive information attacks marked the beginning of the genocide in Nazi Germany, where the anti-cultist Apologetics Center under Walter Kunet played a leading role. A similar rhetoric was used by anti-cultists in China in the 1990s, where millions of people are currently held in concentration camps for so-called re-education. There, prisoners are subjected to real genocide, cruel torture, and organ harvesting without anesthesia. It all starts with a campaign of stigmatization and demonization in the media to prepare society for the acceptance of violence against a dehumanized group of people. Therefore, such statements are unacceptable in a civilized society and should be condemned. Nevertheless, they have only intensified following the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Experts warn that the next step for the initiators of this information war will be the targeted and widespread dissemination of the narrative that the assassination attempt on Donald Trump on July 13, 2024 was staged, and that Trump is so ruthless and cynical that he would sacrifice the lives of his supporters for his political interests. It is not difficult to predict that this monstrous narrative will build on the already established image of Trump as a cult leader and crazy narcissist, supposedly indifferent to the fate of his supporters, similar to Jim Jones, who was indifferent to his followers when he poisoned hundreds of them. Using manipulative propaganda methods, the architects of this scenario are already spreading the version that Trump deliberately staged the assassination attempt on himself to win over voters and strengthen his position. Initially, these narratives are activated in narrow informational niches, social media accounts with small audiences and comments. But then, these destructive narratives naturally seep into everyday conversation, among families, at work, and among friends. This epidemic of disinformation and conspiracy theories has become known as BlueAnon. Destructive messages penetrate mass consciousness, creating lasting doubts that evolve into a full-blown crisis of trust. By using manipulative techniques, they systematically implant negative associations and a persistent image of Trump as a monstrous leader drenched in blood. The success of this disinformation campaign is evident in that, within the first days after the assassination attempt, one-third of Democratic voters most exposed to the anti-cultist media wave immediately accepted these destructive claims as fact. They are convinced that Trump is a man with the blood of his supporters on his hands, supposedly spilled for a few additional percentage points in his ratings. With further skilled manipulation, and given that real experts in public opinion manipulation are at work, the question, could Trump really be so terrible as to do this, will increasingly arise in the minds of more Americans, including the undecided and even Trump supporters. All it takes is to sow doubt, which has already been successfully accomplished. The secret to this technology's success lies in the fact that the human brain always seeks logical completeness and coherence, leading it to search for and construct arguments that confirm the initial doubt. Even if these arguments are contrived and lack factual basis, they will be perceived as convincing because they satisfy our natural need to explain events. Clearly, in the absence of an open presentation of investigation facts to the public and the ambiguous stance of American intelligence agencies, criticized for this by the Senate, the conditions are ripe for further intensification of this destructive campaign to discredit Trump in the eyes of American society. The ultimate goal is to completely destroy Trump as a politician, tarnishing his reputation with suspicion of involvement in the assassination, built on the foundation of a years-long campaign to create a negative image of Trump as a supposed cult leader akin to Jim Jones. While the FBI claims to have been seeking legal ways to obtain the shooter's messenger communications for several weeks, publicly available information clearly indicates the influence of anti-cultists on Thomas Crooks. For instance, it is known that the shooter showed interest in the assassination of Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico. The reasons why anti-cultists wanted to eliminate Fico and the preparation for this assassination were detailed in the article Assassination Attempts on Trump and Fico. What are the intelligence agencies missing? Essentially, Crooks was a victim of anti-cultist influence, just like the shooters who targeted Fico and former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, as previously discussed. The main difference in this assassination attempt was that Thomas Crooks was programmed not to eliminate Trump, but to kill his supporters. The fact that he only grazed Trump's ear proves that he was not a very good shooter. Even an inexperienced person preparing for such a crime would have hit the target with the first shot. Nothing hindered him. He was elevated, shooting from a prone position without any obstacles. But Crooks was convinced that he alone knew the secret to destroying Trump, to shoot not at Trump, but at the people behind him. This idea was implanted in his mind in the same way that anti-cultists provoke school shooting incidents, through a method called puzzle coding. The shooter's interest in the assassination of Fico clearly indicates traces of anti-cultist coding. The topic of shooter coding is thoroughly covered in the article The Hidden Forces Behind the Assassination Attempt on Donald Trump, which analyzes the coding methods leading to horrific crimes committed by children in educational institutions using school shootings as examples. In this case, the methods remain the same. If school shootings are termed school shootings, then attacks on politicians can be called political shootings. Initially, anti-cultists lay a foundation by targeting the audience with materials that popularize previous incidents related to attacks on politicians, murders, and school shootings, particularly the Columbine school massacre. Then, based on this foundation, more detailed directives are implanted, deliberately acting through the victim's subconscious to prompt criminal behavior. Such campaigns conducted by anti-cultists can be compared to fishing with a net. They cast a wide net in which many potential perpetrators of terrorist attacks are caught like fish. These directives, acting on the subconscious, contradict natural conscious aspirations, causing bipolar disorder. By regularly testing and monitoring students for bipolar disorder, one can easily detect the ongoing anti-cultist campaign through a sharp and unnatural rise in bipolar disorder cases within a specific educational institution. Not being sure who will become the actual perpetrator, anti-cultists encode numerous potential shooters. This is vividly illustrated in the film The Impact, which highlights the shooting at a Czech university in late 2023. Many students, manipulated by anti-cultists, began to report bipolar disorder. That case, and similar ones in Europe and Asia, should be thoroughly investigated. They demonstrate that the cause of the shootings lies not in the relatively easy access to firearms, as is not the case in European and Asian countries, but rather in the manipulative methods employed by anti-cult activists. Understanding this mechanism completely removes one of the main issues dividing American society: the question of the open sale of firearms guaranteed by the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Experience shows that a ban on the sale of weapons does not stop killers programmed through puzzle-coding methods. They still find ways to acquire firearms even where sales are banned, or use other methods and tools for committing murder. All these killers, as well as those who have not reached the point of committing murder but have developed severe mental disorders as a result of manipulation, are victims of anti-cultism. The evidence of crimes committed by anti-cultists, who intensified their activities in the U.S. following the Waco massacre, is now enormous. If we do not put an end to anti-cultism, they will end us, our freedom, and our democracy, the very foundation on which the United States stands. Their attacks are not only directed against Donald Trump. Their ultimate goal is the destruction of America. Now is not the time for political games. This is a direct threat to democracy and freedom for people worldwide. Just as anti-cultists manipulated the actions of American intelligence agencies during the Waco events to have American citizens killed, many questions arise in the case of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Why was the shooter, who was spotted long before the shooting and was seen running around on the roof with his weapon visible, not neutralized? On that day, drones intended for aerial surveillance were not operational, and communication channels between local police and federal agencies were down. Too many facts, like in the Waco case, are now being justified as a series of unfortunate coincidences and a lack of professionalism in the organization. In reality, it was simply a setup, and the shooter's task was to target the people standing behind Trump. This is the cynicism of the entire situation. It explains why the intelligence agencies acted as they did, and why the shooter, known in advance, was not neutralized. All of this was part of a meticulously designed anti-cultist plan to eventually produce the desired narrative in the information field, that Trump had deliberately staged the assassination attempt. This is the next stage in the discrediting of Trump after accusing him of being a cult leader. While the victims of anti-cultism commit horrific crimes, the real criminal psychopaths sit in the studios of major television networks, branding innocent people, Trump's supporters, as mindless zombies in need of forced deprogramming. These so-called cult experts once manipulated American authorities, resulting in the brutal killing of U.S. citizens at Waco. The true culprits were never held accountable. The same anti-cultists who manipulated the FBI and ATF during Waco are behind the high-profile terrorist attacks and school shootings committed by our own children. They aim to destroy America from within, stoking hatred and provoking a civil war scenario. The number of school shootings has sharply increased in recent years, reaching approximately 400 incidents annually. Hundreds of children have been killed or wounded. Millions more suffer from psychological trauma and live in constant fear. These tragic outcomes are direct results of the manipulative tactics employed by global anti-cultists, whose hands are stained with the blood of thousands of children. When journalists and TV hosts invite anti-cultists onto their shows, they are not merely propagating extremism, they are also promoting Nazism. This is particularly evident when figures like deprogrammers Steven Hassan and Rick Allen Ross, who played a notorious role in Waco, are featured. These individuals are direct successors of German anti-cultist Walter Kunet, the chief architect and ideologist of the Holocaust. Kunet's Apologetic Center created lists of dissenters which the Gestapo used to send victims to concentration camps. Similar lists are now found on the websites of current anti-cultists. The methods used in Waco are the same tactics that anti-cultists taught the Nazis. The atrocities committed by the Nazis were the result of collaboration between anti-cult organizations and the NSDAP. And now, they aim to replicate their Waco actions on a national scale. Inviting them to media platforms is a direct promotion of Nazism. It spreads a deadly virus of hatred that is already destroying America. It supports school shootings, meaning it endorses those who kill children using our own children as instruments. We must eradicate this virus to save America and protect our children. The best antidote to the virus of hatred they spread is truth. Understanding and recognizing their manipulation techniques will help safeguard oneself and loved ones from harmful attacks. To protect yourself from their influence, it is recommended to watch the film The Impact, which details the manipulative techniques used in organizing school shootings and offers ways to guard against them. The speed at which this information becomes public knowledge determines not only the fate of our children, who are systematically and with impunity killed by anti-cultists, but also the fate of every American citizen and the nation as a whole. The success of the campaign to discredit Trump by spreading the narrative that the assassination attempt was staged can be primarily attributed to the deep understanding that its instigators have of how the human brain and perception psychology work. Manipulators are fully aware that planting just one seed of doubt in people's minds is enough to create mistrust and hatred. Once this seed of suspicion is introduced to the audience's consciousness, it quickly grows on its own, becoming more deeply rooted. Even in the absence of clear evidence supporting the theory of staging, the mere suggestion of it will gradually embed itself in people's minds, reinforcing the thought, could Trump really be such a terrible person as to do this? Such thoughts will not only deter many of those who initially planned to vote for Trump, but will also gradually foster a growing wave of hatred against him. Moreover, once this process begins, it takes on a snowball effect. Doubts start to spread even among those who initially trusted Trump unconditionally. If suspicions about his motives and actions become entrenched in the minds of his supporters, they will be compelled to reconsider their stance toward him. The more people become entangled in this whirlpool of doubt, the more the atmosphere of mistrust and hatred toward Trump will expand. Our analysts believe that, given the unprecedented scale and complexity of the information psychological war waged against Donald Trump by global anti-cult forces, his ratings will be so low by election time that his defeat will be assured regardless of who the Democratic Party nominates, even a total political non-starter. Analysts warn that the worst-case scenario for Trump is currently unfolding, which will undoubtedly have the most catastrophic consequences for his political future. Under the barrage of such monstrous accusations, he will be effectively deprived of the opportunity to defend his positions and justify himself. Public opinion, poisoned by hatred and demonization, is highly likely to side with his political opponents. This will lead to the complete destruction of Trump's image and his humiliation in the eyes of Americans and the international community. It is also important to note that narratives about the staged assassination attempt on Trump are being actively promoted in European, Russian, and Ukrainian media. This indicates that global anti-cult forces also exert significant influence over the media in these countries. For more in-depth information, watch The Impact, groundbreaking documentary.